Good evening, everyone. My name is Ruben Wilson. It is my pleasure to present to you this afternoon the
Hold on,
2000.
Ruben. Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
It's
I
still
just saw that it
loading.
was streaming live on there.
All right, you're good to go.
All right, thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ruben Wilson. It is my pleasure to be the moderator for the 2021 Agricultural Awareness Week Forum, What's the Big Deal with Hemp? Sponsored by Alpha Zeta. Hemp is one of those rare crops that generates a lot of interest from the legality as well as the production and the research. And with this comes questions. Fortunately for us tonight, we have three of the best and brightest that can help us answer these questions. And now to introduce them. First is Dr. Marnie Coit. Dr. Marnie Coit is a professor of agricultural law at North Carolina State University in the Agricultural Business Management and Agricultural Resource Economics departments. Dr. Coit is a professional with extensive knowledge, experience, and passion for hemp laws. Dr. Coit helped to launch and now runs the North Carolina State Extension's hemp law program. We are very grateful and excited to have Dr. Coit as a panelist today with us to share her experiences and knowledge in hemp law. Next is Dr. Sanjun Gu. Dr. Sanjun Gu is a horticulture specialist at North Carolina A&T University. He's an award-winning researcher and extension specialist and has spent his career studying crops and sharing his knowledge with others. Dr. Gu is now one of the leaders of NCA&T's Industrial Hemp Task Force, which has the goal of helping farmers across the state learn how to grow cannabis. Dr. Gu's efforts are primarily focused on outreach and demonstrations. We are excited to have Dr. Gu with us as a panelist today and look forward to hearing about the hemp industry and his experiences as the lead researcher of the Industrial Hemp Task Force. And the third and final panelist is Dr. David Suchoff. Dr. David Suchoff's passion for plants led him to his current position as the Alternative Crops Assistant Professor in the Department of Crop and Soil Sciences at NC State. His program takes a holistic, system-based approach to apply agronomic research on new and emerging crops in North Carolina. Dr. Suchoff's current research and extension activities focus on hemp, floral and fiber, sesame, rice, and organic commodity crops such as tobacco, sweet potato, and grains. Having Dr. Suchoff as a panelist today is both an honor and a privilege, and we are more than excited to hear his perspective on the state of hemp. So without further ado, I will ask the first question. It will be directed towards Dr. Coit, and then Dr. Gu, and then Dr. Suchoff can follow and point with their answers on the question. To reiterate to our panelists, after this first question, it'll be a first come, first serve on the following questions on who feels like they can add an informative answer and give light to the question. So Dr. Coit, for the first question, down to the basics, what is hemp and what can it be used for? What are the major differences between hemp grown for fiber, grain, and CBD?
Ruben, first, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here today, and thank you for moderating this panel. I'm very glad this is part of Ag Awareness Week this year. As you mentioned, there's a lot of interest in hemp. I think it's coming from farmers. I think it's coming from students. It's coming from consumers. I think it's just an area that is exciting for a lot of reasons, and a lot of people have questions about it. A lot of people are looking for accurate information about it, and so I welcome the opportunity to talk about it here today and have it featured in Ag Awareness Week. And I would say one of the reasons I think so many people are interested in it is because there is so much potential. There are so many uses, as you alluded to. Some of the main categories are fiber, grain, and CBD. And when you look at the fiber side of things, there are uses in terms of hempcrete, so for construction materials. I know there is a place in Kentucky that's making floorboards out of hemp. People have put it into car panels. There are other plans or potential plans to put it into, I think, airplanes and other industrial uses. From my perspective, when we are talking about hemp from a legal perspective, and I think this will underpin the rest of our conversation tonight, strictly speaking from a legal perspective, According to the Farm Bill, hemp is defined as having a 0.3% or less percentage of THC. Once it goes above that limit, according to the law, it is considered marijuana. I know the term marijuana has a lot of nuance to it. I don't know that we'll get into that discussion tonight. I might be outside the scope of our discussion tonight. But again, just from a strictly legal sense, in terms of what it says in the Farm Bill, it's that 0.3% THC threshold. And I will turn it over to my colleagues because in terms of growing hemp, they know a lot more about the differences between the different types of hemp.
Thank you, Dr. Coy. Yes, Dr. Gu.
Okay,
What are the major differences between hemp grown for fiber, grain, and CBD?
Okay, Dr. Coy said very clearly that for cannabis, it's less than 0.3% on the dry mass base. Those are called hemp. Above that is not hemp. So basically, you cannot tell the difference between the hemp plant and the marijuana plant. So I want to make it very clear. So they look exactly the same, smell exactly the same. You cannot tell the difference. So the term for hemp is really based, it's kind of a man-made standard, based on the threshold of the THC content. So the difference between hemp for fibers and the greens, well, your question is about the difference between fiber and grain, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so basically we grow hemp for three different distinctive products. One is for fiber, which is the stock, really straight stock used for fibers, and the long fiber, which can be used for ropes and other stuff. And the greens is really the hemp grown to harvest for seeds. And seeds, you can make it like other grains, and you can put into your salad. And also from the grains, the seeds, you actually can extract the seed oil, which is very different from CBD essential oil. So that's another major difference. Basically the difference is depend on what you're growing for. So they use different parts of the plant. So for greens, you have its seeds. For fibers, you have its stalk. And for CBDs, you have its the flower buds. So that's my understanding. So.
Thank you, Dr. Gu. Dr. Suchoff, do you have anything you would like to add about the major differences between hemp grown for fiber, grain, and CBD?
Sure, yeah. First, thank you for the opportunity. Both Marnie and Sanjun really hit on kind of the main differences. One important thing to know about cannabis in general is that it's a dioecious plant. And what that means is you have distinctive male plants and distinctive female plants based on their flowering. And when we're growing for, say, CBD, either for extraction or in smokable hemp or what have you, we want to grow female plants because the female flowers have a very high density of trichomes, which is where the cannabinoids, CBD, CBG, and whatnot are being produced. So if we're growing for cannabinoids, we want only females in our field. If we're growing for grain and fiber, well, for grain, we have to have a mix of male and female so that the males will pollinate the female and we get seed production. For fiber, it doesn't necessarily matter in terms of male versus female because we're just, as Sanjun mentioned, we're just harvesting the stalk. The other thing that I like to tell folks is that when you look at how they're produced in the field, floral hemp for CBD is produced much more like a horticultural crop, like tomatoes and even tobacco. There's a lot of labor involved in the production of this crop, and it's a relatively expensive crop to grow on a per acre basis. And it's generally a low population within the field, so anywhere from 1,500 to 1,700 plants per acre. Now, for grain and fiber, that's grown a lot more like our traditional row crops, corn, soybean, wheat, where it's highly mechanized and you need a lot of acres to produce a profitable crop. And there we're talking about densities of 800,000 to 1 million seeds per acre. So very, very different systems.
I want to add something to what David says about the male plants. So, I do outreach work a lot. So I always tell people male plants is essential for grain production of hemp and is not ideal for fiber production. And it is detrimental for CBD production. So that's something a lot of people don't understand. So
Thank you all three for those answers. Those were very informative and helped get us off on the right note of understanding the big deal with hemp. So for our second question is, what is the #1 problem with producing hemp presently? And what do you believe could impede the industry in the future? And any panelist is open to answering these. You can add to this answer.
I'll take this one first. And again, from my perspective, this is coming from a legal perspective. I think the biggest impediment right now is the law. So it's incredibly complex. It changes quickly. And what we're looking at right now is an intersection between a federal law, so the 2014 Farm Bill, and the 2018 Farm Bill. So those are both pieces of federal legislation. Right now, we are still in the process of transitioning between the provisions of the 2014 Farm Bill and the 2018 Farm Bill. So some states are still operating under the 2014 Farm Bill, some are operating under the 2018 Farm Bill. So just as a business, if you're trying to do business in more than one state, so in interstate commerce, meaning across state lines, you might have to follow a different set of laws in every state that you want to do business in, right? So that's one impediment, I would say. And then the other thing that comes up is, particularly in North Carolina right now, we're also dealing with our state law and how that intersects with the two federal laws. So when I say it's complicated, it is incredibly, incredibly complicated. I'm still working on getting my legal videos, like my short snippets, down to less than 15 minutes. I haven't gotten there yet. But I just feel like to get in all the nuance, it does take a lot to explain that. And then the other issue on the legal side is, because of this association with marijuana, which under the law is considered to be a Schedule I drug, it's a controlled substance, there are other business issues that folks in the hemp industry run into. And so this is also related to the law, because they run into issues with things like banking. So even though the Farm Bill passed originally in 2014, and then things really opened up in 2018 with that Farm Bill, we're still in 2021, and I'm still getting emails from folks who are getting their bank accounts shut down, right? And they're working at hemp, which is legal, right? That's what we just discussed. So it's legal, and bank accounts are still being shut down. So that's an issue. Getting insurance is still an issue. I think on the attorney side, maybe it's just the field I work in. It feels like there are enough attorneys working in hemp. We could always use more if anybody's interested. But I think some of those other really basic business services are still an issue for folks who work in the hemp industry. So for me, I would definitely say the law is one of the biggest impediments right now.
I guess this is not necessarily an impediment to production, but when we're talking about hemp for CBD or cannabinoid, the market is the biggest issue right now. A few years back, people had heard that they can make a lot of money growing. And so what happened is everybody grew. And what happened is that the supply just greatly outweighed the demand and completely flooded the market to the point where I still get contacted by farmers who grew in 2019 who are sitting on tens of thousands of pounds of biomass that they harvested that they cannot sell. So it's not the most difficult crop to grow. There are a few minor challenges, but there are much more difficult crops to grow. It's more of being able to sell it and also to be profitable when selling it. Now that's for cannabinoid production. The biggest challenge for production for fiber that we have right now is we don't really have a good go-to variety, or the genetics are not really there yet for good fiber production. Hemp is day length sensitive, and so what that means is it's going to grow vegetatively, meaning producing stems and leaves, up until the days are short enough where it's going to stop that growth, and then it's going to start to produce flowers. For fiber production, we want to get as much production as possible. We want these plants to be 15 to 20 feet tall if we could. But what's the problem our growers are facing is that the varieties that are currently available to us are bred at more northerly latitudes, places like Canada, the Ukraine, Poland. And so what happens is when they're grown in North Carolina, they end up initiating flowering much too early on, so that they're going to start flowering when they're about 2 feet tall. And so we're just not getting the amount of production yet that would be, profitable for a farmer to actually grow for fiber.
I want to add something based on what David and Marty said. Marketing is really uncertain, that's for sure. And the other thing is people have an unrealistic expectation to this crop. It's been banned for so many years, they just think this is a hidden treasure. So it's you found gold there. Everybody can just get on it and make money. So that's really the misconception about hemp production. So a lot of people, especially I work with smaller scale farmers, and they just have all those goals set in their mind without any knowledge about hemp. And some of those people just have land and never grew anything in their life. They think they jump into hemp and make this profitable. That's really unrealistic. That's one thing. The other thing is, so far we've been a lot of people focusing on CBD production because the other challenge to fiber and greens is the competition in the national market. So you look at the fiber production in China and greens in Canada, all the different places. We already have developed the system from the genetics, the cultivars to the techniques to machineries. So they already have those. So getting into this not really new enterprise in our country, we immediately put us into a disadvantaged situation. So international competition on fiber and grains are a huge challenge to us as well.
And if I could just add one other piece of information for context. The first year that hemp was allowed to be grown in North Carolina was 2017. And in that year, the estimate I think is that we had around 70 to 90 licensees. So in order to grow hemp in North Carolina, you do have to get a license from the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. But that first year we had between 70 and 90, that's a rough estimate. And then by the end of 2000, we had more than 1,500 licensees. So the program grew really, really quickly. So when David said earlier, there's a lot of overproduction, that is very accurate. And the other thing that folks weren't anticipating when the program was started is that we would have so many farmers who were going to grow for CBD. I think at that point when the program was started, the thought was that more growers would get into fiber. So the other issue that we had is when we had those 1,500 licensees, I think what is the percentage? Like 96 to 98% of growers are growing for CBD. And that's why we ran into that issue that David mentioned about having overproduction in the fall of 2019. So just to give you a little bit more context when we say overproduction, like really serious overproduction.
Yeah, and it's not just here in North Carolina. It's mirrored across the nation, every state. 2019 was just a huge year where everybody was growing. And it's amazing to see how, when I first started, I started with this position in January 2019, I think that's right, and or 2020. And when I started, the price for CBD was around $3.50-ish per percent CBD pound. And now it's at about 60 cents, 75 cents. We're never going to go back to those $3 plus, just because it's, as I mentioned, it's not that difficult to grow. And we're just not going to get back there. So we now have to figure out how can farmers be profitable with the price, where it is in terms of just 60 to 75 cents. It's very, very low.
Wow, some very incredible numbers that you're talking about there, all three of you. I don't think anybody really realizes the legal battle. I didn't realize different states had to conduct under different farm bills, and the production. That's incredible. 96% growing for Canada. That's insane. So our next question, Dr. Coit has kind of already touched on, but it is, what are the biggest regulation barriers in growing hemp? And anybody can feel free to speak to that.
So again, I would go back to what I said earlier about this issue with the transition between the 2014 and 2018 farm bills. So that will kind of settle out in January of 2022. because that's when all the pilot programs that were created under the 2014 Farm Bill will expire. So as of January of next year, everybody will be operating under the provisions of the 2018 Farm Bill. That said, under the provisions of the 2018 Farm Bill, there are two different paths that states and tribal nations can take. They can either submit a state plan to the USDA for approval, and then all growers will follow that state plan. And mostly across the country, it's going to be the State Department of Ag that will implement that plan. So for us here in North Carolina, it'd be NCDA. Or states can say they're not going to submit a state plan, and growers can apply directly to the USDA for a license. So in North Carolina right now, I don't know what's going to happen when our pilot program expires in January. We don't have an answer about that yet. I assume we will coming up in the next few months, but for this year, if you want to grow in the 2021 growing season, you do still have to apply for a license from NCDA. So everything I'm talking about so far has to do with cultivation. That falls under the USDA. And if I use acronyms that people don't know, please let me know. So it's the United States Department of Agriculture. So right now, when we're talking about USDA and pilot programs and the Farm Bill, most of what we've talked about so far all has to do with cultivation, right? It's the production of hemp. Once it's cultivated, once it's being processed, then USDA no longer has authority over that product. So at that point, it falls under the under the FDA, or the Food and Drug Administration. So if you are, let's say, for example, going to a corner store or a grocery store or a pharmacy, and you're buying a tincture, right? A CBD tincture in that dropper bottle. Right now, that's not regulated, right? That's a final product. It's been processed. It's out of USDA's authority, right? They don't have authority to regulate that. It falls under FDA, but we don't have regulations from the FDA yet. And I don't know how long it's going to be until we have them. I really don't know if it's going to be 2 years or another 6 years. I heard yesterday, I think that somebody said they should be coming out soon, but then you also hear it could be another 4 years. So I just don't know right now. But it is something that I think it's important that consumers are aware of, because again, that's not being regulated. There are some states that have implemented their own laws. And so there are certain states where if you go and you buy a consumer product, it is being regulated. But for the most part, a lot of states, it's not right now. And again, it's not regulated at the federal level. Confusing, straightforward.
It is
When I-
confusing, yeah.
Usually when I do presentations, I say at the end, like, if you're totally confused, then you've been following along.
That is exactly true. So, for the growing part, USDA really regulates everything. And then once you harvest through the processing, FDA going to kick in. And then when you hauling things around, you can get a DEA, people can pull you over. So it's really confusing. But one good side of this is USDA finally released the final hemp rule for production, right? And started to be effective yesterday, actually, 22nd. So our state decided to go with our pilot program grow until next year. So for after this season anyway. So at least on the bright side, in growing hemp, we have some standard FDA regulation. So that's better than the confusing past, I would say. So
One I guess issue, if you were to talk to a lot of farmers about it, that kind of is holding them back. Inevitably, it always comes back to that 0.3% THC. So, farmers are getting better and breeders are getting better about developing varieties that really stay below that 0.3% as long as possible. And farmers are getting better about knowing when to harvest to avoid having it go above that 0.3%. But, what we've seen time and time again is that if you want to maximize your CBD production, you're inevitably going to go hot, meaning you're going to go above your 0.3% threshold. So, if you were to leave your crop in the field, it tends to accumulate more cannabinoids over time. And so, unfortunately, the farmer has to make the decision of, I need to harvest now, even though it's probably not the most CBD I could produce, but it's a legal product, versus I may risk it to try and get a little bit more CBD, but it may be destroyed because it goes above that 0.3%. And so, you know, a lot of folks are always throwing out different numbers that should be used to define hemp instead of the 0.3. I've heard people say 0.5. I've heard some people say 1%. The one thing that's important for people to know is that the USDA is not the body that sets that limit. That is set by Congress. So, you know, when the USDA had opened up comments for these new interim regulations, time and time again, people are saying you need to change the 0.3. You need to change the 0.3, and the USDA said we can't legally. They can't, and so literally it is an act of Congress for that to be changed. And so I don't think it's going to be changed in the near future.
Wow. And so I think Dr. Gu and Dr. Coit both mentioned that during processing, it falls under the FDA's jurisdiction. That's not normal for usual crops. Is that correct? Is that just for hemp?
No, it's not just for hemp. So FDA is a Food and Drug Administration. So anything that is a human food or dietary supplement or animal feed, if it falls under the FDA's jurisdiction for other food items or other drugs, then they also have the authority to regulate hemp. So this goes back to the very first question about what can hemp be used for, and that's why it starts to get really confusing, because we're not creating a new agency that regulates hemp, right? Or a cannabis regulation agency. We're using the existing laws and the existing regulatory structure with certain agencies and plugging hemp into where it belongs, if that makes sense. And I hadn't thought about it until just now, but I don't know if that's going to be an issue in the long run or not. I mean, I don't think the federal government is looking at creating any more agencies right now, but it is where it starts to get a little bit confusing. And I would say that that's true for, to go a little bit off topic, that's true for a lot of food items. But the way our food system is regulated doesn't always make sense either. But again, we're just using the existing structure that's in place.
Thank you for that clarification. And our next question, Dr. Suchoff kind of alluded to in his last answer, but why are the legal limits of percent THC so low when growing hemp? And you also mentioned this a little bit, Dr. Suchoff, of what are the repercussions a farmer can face if they get too high or go hot, as you said.
So in terms of where 0.3% comes from, there was a paper published, I think it was in the late 70s, where researchers looked at a way to kind of set a limit and define what is considered marijuana, recreational marijuana, and what is considered hemp. And if you look at the actual language, and this frustrates a lot of people, but the researchers themselves said that it was an arbitrary selection, and it was also based off of leaves, not flowers. And so that's where people are also frustrated, because leaves in general don't have the trichome density that flowers do. And so if you were to take the leaves of a lot of, CBD varieties right now and tested them, they would almost most definitely be below 0.3%. And so there's a little bit of a misstep between what Congress used to define hemp and what is reality. Now, regardless of that, the law is the law, right? And we are all working under that law. And in terms of what happens if it goes hot, meaning it goes above 0.3%, basically you have to destroy your crop, is what it comes down to. Now, different states have different ways of doing the testing. So here in North Carolina, I think it's kind of a 2-strike system, or 3. I can't remember, Marnie. Okay. And so you get it tested, and if it's tested hot, you can get it tested again at a different lab. But if it consistently is above that 0.3% threshold, you have to destroy your crop. You can burn it, you could till it in. And unfortunately, there's no insurance that covers for hot hemp either. So you lose a huge investment.
And
Yeah, I
I'll
want
just
to add something. Go ahead, Amanda.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say, to add to what David's saying, that's correct under the law that we're operating under right now. As Dr. Gu mentioned earlier, when in North Carolina, we start following USDA's final rule, which will go into effect here in January of 2022, they did put in or 2 ways to remediate it. So if your crop tests hot, you can either destroy the flower and then sell the rest of the plant, or you can take the whole plant that has tested hot, grind it up into biomass, and then retest it. But if it still tests hot, then you'll have to destroy it. So that remediation piece is an important part of what they put into, the USDA put into their final rule. But again, in North Carolina, if you're operating, if you have a license and you're growing this season, we're still following the rules of the pilot program. And so remediation is not an option for this season in North Carolina.
Yeah, I want to add something to the THC content. Law is law. This is the number we work with. And internationally, most countries use this 0.3%. So David talked about the history. That's very interesting where it came from. So right now we're stuck on that. The thing can be changed, if Congress hear more from the voice, right? So the only thing we can do is just, our citizens can just voice out want to read this one. Maybe it's going to work, but we don't really know for sure. So one thing I want to talk about, the THC is so low, 0.3%, right? That's a very limiting factor to your CBD concentration you can harvest. So last year there was a paper published. So really the CBD and the THC ratio is a chemotype, is a genetic type. So it's a treat. So it's environmental factors can only do this much to them. So it's determined by genetics. Right now, there are 3 different types. The one which will be legal and the 0.3% THC is in the range of 20 to 30 to 1 between the CBD and the THC. If you do 30, you multiply 0.3%, the best you can get is 6% of CBD. So, based on the number we have, unless there's a big improvement in genetics, and you stuck with maybe 6 to 8% CBD, the maximum. And the other type of chemotype is all falling under the marijuana category. So the THC is way high. So right now, if we use the legal number, I think people will not get more than 8% for sure, mostly probably 6% CBD. And to begin with, several years ago, we were talking about 10% at least. And some companies don't even look at less than 6% CBD. So that's the reality we have to deal with. Unless the regulation changed, we have to stuck with this number. So, and last year there was the national USDA offered national hemp symposium. It became virtual. It's supposed to be Colorado. So a lot of people, including scientists, industry people, everybody think maybe 1% is the best number. But hey, we are at 3.3% right now. So.
Thank you for that information, Dr. Gu. That's good to know what the professionals think it should be or could be to work best for the farmer. I think Dr. Shuchoff alluded to this. It said that it's hard to get insurance when growing hemp. Is that because of the volatility in broaching that hot level and insurance agencies not wanting to pay out? Or?
No, sorry. What I meant to say, so you can get crop insurance now for hemp, okay. But crop insurance, oops, it looks like I froze. Crop insurance will not cover your crop if it goes hot. So they'll cover things like act of God, right? So you have a huge storm that comes through and it destroys your crop, that's covered. But if your crop goes above 0.3% and you do have to end up destroying it, that will not be covered by insurance, right? So you lose all that money you invested into growing it.
Thank you for that clarification. That makes more sense. So our next question, kind of a wide-ranging effect that could happen here, but how would the legalization of cannabis affect the hemp industry as a whole?
So I would go back to an earlier answer when I said some of the issues that the hemp industry has is with banking, insurance for the businesses, all of those basic business issues that every industry faces. So one thing that I think could happen is some of that could ease up because you won't have this issue about, for example, your bank not knowing the difference between hemp and marijuana, right? Because if it's all legal, then potentially a lot of those restrictions will ease. So from my perspective on the legal and business side, I think that potentially it will help things in terms of hemp. Like right now, for example, another issue that comes up is shipping hemp across state lines. If there are different carriers and whether or not they will ship it, because some carriers don't want to. Right now, I'd say probably USPS is the best option for folks who want to ship products. But of course, the downside to that is the United States Postal Service is having a lot of other issues. So if your business is dependent on shipping product and the one carrier you can use, I don't want to say that the United States Postal Service isn't reliable. I'll just say that they're having some serious issues right now. So if you ship something and it takes 4 weeks to 6 weeks to get there, imagine how that impacts your business, right? If your customers order something and don't receive it for 6 weeks or 2 months, that has a big impact on your business. So if or when this happens, I again think that some of these basic business services will open up to the hemp industry.
I think the other thing can think of, I'm not saying this is happening, I'm saying that legalization of hemp kind of slightly open the door, at least make people think that maybe one day they can push hard to legalize medicinal marijuana. Some states already do that. So I think that could be an impact to industry in the future. And also right now, the industry probably can put more effort on those. Personally, I'm not in favor of everything. I'm just saying that, saying this possibility to affect the industry because in the past, the hemp is not legal and all of a sudden it became legal. So do people want to go further to legalize medicinal marijuana or something like that? So yeah, so I think these both challenge opportunities.
So I think if cannabis were, recreational cannabis were made legal federally, it may ease on the THC limit for growing hemp, but my concern would be more so surrounding what we saw with CBD hemp, in that everybody would want to grow it. And everybody would grow it because they think they're going to make money. And we're going to see the exact same thing happen, where the market is just absolutely flooded, and farmers are going to end up losing money, or going to be making a lot less than they thought they would. But there's only so much you can do to tell folks not to grow a crop, or to really be careful that they know what they're getting themselves into. But I just see it kind of opening the floodgates.
Yeah, we have already seen a lot of farmers jump into hemp already, not even recreational marijuana. So we definitely I always caution people, especially small farmers, don't bet on your retirement on this crop unless you have a market and can sell them. So.
And then can I also ask or put this out to my colleagues? When we're looking at regulating this at the federal level, what are some of the considerations? For example, setbacks. Do either of you know what that number would look like, so you don't have an issue with cross-pollination?
Cross-pollination?
Yeah.
Oh, so the issues where if my neighbor was growing green and I was growing, yeah. So I was actually just talking to some folks at Cornell about this. They haven't published the data yet, so I don't really know how far the pollen will travel, but there are ways around that. So there are more and more breeding companies that are developing triploid hemp varieties. And so little science lesson, but cannabis itself is diploid. Humans are diploid. We have 2 sets of chromosomes, one from our mother, one from our father. They're in vegetable production. And this actually happens in nature too sometimes, you can get extra sets of chromosomes. It affects what's called the ploidy level. So we're diploids, but there's also such things as triploids, meaning there are 3 sets. And so, for example, seedless watermelon are triploid. And so they produce fruit, but they don't have any seeds. So there's a way, and they're already being marketed, to grow triploid hemp. So it's going to produce flower, and even if pollen falls on that flower, theoretically it will not be pollinated. It's pollen sterile. So that's one way to deal with it. The other thing is, there are a lot of people talking about production of cannabinoids really should be done more indoors, and grain and fiber should be outdoors. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, but there are some folks that would argue that you do much better indoors with cannabinoid hemp.
I would say that if people have a facility like a greenhouse, doing CBD production in the greenhouse is the best way. That's traditionally how marijuana has been produced. So in the greenhouse, you have control over the day length, because cannabis is a photosensitive crop. So you have a better control of your crop. However, not everybody will have the greenhouse. And also the CBD hemp can grow very well in the open field situation. So, we don't really know exactly how far the pollen travels. And some people see 6 miles, some people even see 10 miles. So my experience is probably at least 3 miles. We have some situations that the hemp got contaminated, but you don't know where the pollens come from, because there are so many hemp farmers pop up here and there. So it's really hard to control. So right now, there's no better way to control. Just have to make sure you talk to your neighbor, know your neighbor, and then work out a deal with them. So the triploid stuff probably still a little far away for us to use. Eventually will probably.
Very interesting. And Dr. Gu gives us a good segue into our next question, kind of shifting into what do the inputs of producing hemp look like compared to our more standard row crops in North Carolina, like cotton or tobacco?
So compared to tobacco, well, I will say this, they're very, very common in terms of their production requirements. And that's why we've seen that our tobacco farmers are extremely successful in growing hemp. In general, in terms of inputs, when we're talking about flue-cured tobacco, which is very common in the coastal plain region, hemp requires more nitrogen. We're seeing that it requires about 150-ish pounds of nitrogen per acre, whereas for flue-cured tobacco, you really want to limit that to like 65 or 75 pounds of nitrogen per acre. One other thing that should be noted about hemp is that because it's a new crop, there have not been many products in terms of pesticides that have hemp or label on the label, meaning you can't legally apply certain insecticides or herbicides in your field. And so that has really limited what farmers can do. But there are more and more pesticides now coming out that are labeled for use in hemp. But that has been a challenge. In other things, water requirements aren't that different. It's a relatively thrifty plant when it comes to water. It does not like a lot of water, but it's, I guess it's similar. As I said, it's similar to tobacco. It's, when it was first legal, everyone was saying it's this miracle plant that doesn't need any water, or doesn't need any fertilizer, it has no pests, and that can't be farther from the truth. I mean, the amount of pests that you can get in this crop are unbelievable. It absolutely requires fertilizer. It absolutely requires water. It's a plant just like any other plant.
Yeah, the good thing is both NC State and the ANT State have done quite a bit of research. For example, David said, about 120, 150 pounds nitrogen per acre, and we don't need a lot of potassium. So those being worked out pretty well. And of course, it's just a crop. You can get disease, you can get insect pests, everything like that. You need water, you need the fertilizer. And if you compare to, David made a good comparison. So if you grow greens, just like grow your row crops, right? And for fiber, is grow the tall plant, try to boost the biomass. And then for CBD production, you more or less treat it like a horticulture crop. And that's probably why I was signed to do hemp, because I'm polyculturist. So a lot of people see that you can treat your hemp almost like treat your tomato, because you have to do a lot of similar things to tomato plants and to hemp. So so I would see that the input to greens almost well, including the outcome from your greens hemp is similar to wheat, according to a study from Canada. So David said very clearly that farmers, previous or current tobacco farmers in North Carolina have been very successful in growing hemp, because a lot of similarity between the two crop in management, and also they share some of the similar equipment. And more importantly, for CBD, you have to have the tobacco barn to dry your stuff. So for that reason, if farmers have a good tobacco already, have a facility infrastructure, that put him or her in a better situation to be successful. And we still need to do to have a little more research on fiber and the green hemp in the future. So David mentioned this morning, there's some research going on with hemp cultivars from Asia. So I think in a couple of years, we have more information on those, and we probably will have a better comparison in the future.
Absolutely, that's some good information to know. Like you said, there's not been, since it's just recently been legalized, there's not a whole lot of research out there for people to understand what the requirements are for it to produce. That being said, if somebody comes to you and says they're interested in growing hemp, what would you tell them?
Be careful, be cautious, proceed with caution. Don't invest more than you can afford to lose. There's still so much volatility in the market. And again, the issue with the regulations and not knowing what the law is going to be. And I'm guessing the answer would be the same for all three of us, but really proceed with caution. If you do proceed, make sure that you have a buyer. That's an issue that we saw a lot in 2019 and also in 2020, that folks wanted to get into the industry. They're very excited about it. They planned it. They were sure they're going to be able to sell it somewhere, but they didn't know where, and then didn't have a buyer. And so it's really important to make sure you have a buyer. I would say make sure you have a written contract, have an attorney look over your contract. That's not going to protect you 100%. We saw a lot of buyers just close their doors or walk away in 2020. But you know, I look at it from a risk management perspective. And in terms of legal risk management, it means protecting yourself as much as possible. Conduct due diligence, make sure you know who you're working with, and just proceed with caution. And then also, if anybody's watching this and they want to get into hemp this year and you're in North Carolina, again, just remember you can get a license this year. It's, you know, NCDA is still issuing licenses, but be aware that your license will only be good until January of 2022.
I totally agree. When small farmers approach to me, sometimes even not small farmers, they are landowners approach to me talking about the hemp. So my first question is, well, usually how much do you know about hemp? Because a lot of people have no clue about what hemp is. And then I find out if they do have some experience working with crop production, and they ask them, do you have a market? You know, Marty said, a market is important. You have to have a good contract to begin with. Before you grow anything, you make sure you can sell them. Otherwise, don't get into that. So I have been able to tell a lot of farmers to, you know, and hopefully I have convinced them hemp just not the best crop for them. So it's situation specific, but I see that a lot of farmers, they probably not in the best situation, but to their best benefit may not be good for them to get into hemp business. So I guess the most important thing is make sure the farmers get educated, have a market to go for it. So.
Yeah, I think Marnie and Sanjun really nailed it. I mean, I think maybe the only thing I would add when I'm talking to farmers is I always, you know, if they are set on growing hemp, I always just tell them to just start small, just you know, test the waters, just do a little experimental plot so you learn about the plant and how to grow it, what works, what doesn't work. And then if goes hot and you have to destroy it, you're not out that much. Like Marnie said, never invest more than you're willing to lose. And it's just, you may find that it's not for you. I know that I'm sure I come off as a wet blanket in a lot of the extension meetings because I talk about all this, but I guess I would rather the farmers be safe economically and legally than getting into any issues because they just heard, maybe some misinformation elsewhere.
Yeah, I want to add something to David said. It's very important to start small if they are set to grow hemp, because from last several years experience, based on our trial, what we have seen that there are some varieties companies try to promote, definitely is marijuana varieties, and they definitely can get hot. So if you grow acres of acres, you just kind of have to destroy them. So because the industry is still kind of in the different modes than we wanted to say. So we just have to try small and to have a variety which is reliable to your soil and to your situation. So you will not be failed by that much if tested high. So.
And again, just for more specific context, when we're talking about starting small, when I think about starting small for hemp, I think like 1 to 5 acres. Would the two of you agree with that, or do you have a different number in mind?
I always say at 1 acre or less. Now it is subjective, right? To a 1,000-acre farmer, 5 acres is not much, but to a 5-acre farmer, 1 acre is a lot. So it depends. It's all relative, but we have looked at the economics, and it costs about $11,000 to $15,000 an acre to grow floral hemp. So even just saying 1 acre, I mean, that is a huge investment to growing a crop. So, the smaller the better in the first year.
Yeah, I agree. Hemp is a very labor demanding crop. 1 acre is a lot already. So just like you grow field tomatoes, and 1 acre tomatoes is a lot of tomatoes. So.
I hope that those specific numbers help our audience understand the perspective that we're coming from. And like David said, I was thinking about that as the three of us are talking. One of the first things I said is that people are so interested in hemp. We always get a lot of questions, or so many people want to get into this industry. And after seeing what has happened in the industry over the last few years, I think all of us would say, like, proceed really cautiously, and not to, I can speak for myself. I'm not saying that I don't think people should get into the industry. I still think that there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of things we haven't explored. But I think all three of us are just saying, like, be really careful at this point.
Yes, I think the acre is really, I think David and we meant 1 acre is a lot, is for CBD. If your fiber and the grains, 1 acre is not much. I think you're right on mark. 1 to 5 acres for small acreage for greens or fiber production. It just for CBD is quite a lot to begin with. So, yeah, cautious. Be cautious to begin with. That's never wrong.
Yeah, a lot of good advice there from 3 knowledgeable people. Those are very good things to know for anybody who are interested in growing hemp or getting into it. At this time, I would like to remind our viewers on the live stream on YouTube that we will have some time for audience questions for our panelists. So if you have any that we have not reached yet or would like for them to clarify on, please comment it in the live stream and they will be funneled to me. For now, the next question, and one that I've thought of, because I'm someone that deals with long-term environmental effects and soil impacts, is what are the environmental effects of growing hemp, and would you consider them to be sustainable over the growing period?
So it's a great question. And honestly, we don't really know yet. There's not been a lot of research on the environmental effect of hemp production. One area that there's a lot of interest in is that hemp may be a bioaccumulator or a heavy accumulator of heavy metals in the soil and contaminants in the soil. there's a lot of concern from the cannabinoid industry because they're worried that those heavy metals or contaminants are going to make their way into that CBD oil, right? And humans should not be ingesting, things that are contaminated with lead or zinc or so on. But on the flip side of that, folks that are growing maybe fiber or grain may be able to actually improve their soil conditions because the crop is able to pull out, say, excess zinc or excess cadmium. There's been research that's shown that the plant can pull those metals out of the soil, but to what degree, we're not quite sure.
Yeah, I want to add a couple more things to the environmental sustainability. Phytomediation, what David said, is very promising on hemp. It's kind of it's just suck everything up from the soil, including good and bad ones. So definitely use there. And also people have been talking about hemp can produce a lot of biomass and potential for biofuel, bioenergy stuff. So that's one thing can be a good crop as candidate. And also people also talk about the sequestration because it fixes a lot of CO2. So we know the CO2 is a big thing. Not allowed. It's always been a big issue. So hemp can absorb a lot of CO2, which probably will help with environmental effect on the CO2 part. So I think put into summary, right now people have been talking about the hemp. On this side is really the photomediation, biomass or bioenergy, and also biosequestration. Those three types, which can be pretty good for environment.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Marnie.
Go ahead, David.
Well, one thing I was going to add, and this is not the crop itself, but the production systems that is concerning is I see folks that may be new to agriculture or farming that want to get into it because they want to grow hemp, end up growing, they're just a hemp farm, meaning they grow hemp after hemp after hemp after hemp, a monoculture, right? Environmentally speaking, that is not a good thing to do, right? For sustainability, it's all about diversity on your farm. Not just environmental sustainability, but economic sustainability. And so I am concerned a little bit when I hear of folks that are new to farming and they just want to grow hemp. And it's concerning, because of the issues that arise when you just grow the same crop on the same land year after year. But economically speaking, it is unbelievably unsustainable. If you have a bad year, you're done, you're out. So that is just one thing to consider when you think about the environmental impact of the crop and the production system that you use.
And I was just going to add, in addition to the production side, if you're looking at the products, the end products that hemp can be used for, I know some people are looking at using hemp, I think in conjunction with plastic, but that it could replace some plastic use. I don't know that it would replace plastic 100%, but my understanding it would be a partial replacement.
Some very interesting information about that, the sustainability. I know I've read before of the use of hemp rope and material like that. So I see what you're saying as far as replacing plastics. That's really interesting about the bioaccumulation and phytoremediation. I've never heard that about hemp. So that's interesting to know as well. We do have a question from our live stream, and it is, if your crop goes hot and needs to be destroyed, can you just redesignate your hemp towards fiber or grain use instead of CBD purpose?
No. Grain and fiber has to be tested for THC as well. All cannabis has to be tested. So you can redesignate it, but you got hot grain or you got hot fiber that has to be destroyed too.
Agree with that answer. I don't have anything else to add, but yeah, it's the same because the USDA doesn't make a distinction between end products. They are just looking at cultivation. So once it tests hot, it tests hot. And I know I think that's an issue that people are looking at across the country in terms of if there's a way to change that at all in the law, but that's not the way it is right now.
Yeah, once it's hot, it's always hot.
Yeah, very good, short to the point. That's a good answer to know. I was wondering that myself. Another question from the live stream is who oversees just the destroying process, and to make sure no profit is made off of the hemp that is over the legal limit? And what happens to the farmer or the operation if it is not destroyed properly?
So it depends on which law you're falling under right now, of course. But here in North Carolina, you do have to have somebody who is designated to be there. So right now, the way our laws are written, a farmer can't destroy it on their own. There does have to be somebody who's officially designated to be there to make sure that it's destroyed, to watch it happen. It can, as I think David mentioned this earlier on, it can be, I forget the whole list, it can be burnt, it could be buried, it can be disked under. There's a whole list of ways that the USDA says have been approved in order to destroy it. And then what was the second part of that question again?
What is the repercussions for the farmer or operation if it is not destroyed properly?
That's a good question. And at that point, it would potentially fall under law enforcement if law enforcement wanted to pursue that in any way.
Yeah, I think, and Marnie would know this better than I would, but if a grower knew that it was above 0.3% and they knowingly continue to grow it, well, now they're growing marijuana, right? Because remember, if it's above 0.3, it's marijuana. If it's below, it's hemp. And so, yeah, but I don't know what happens after that.
Correct, and that's why I said it'd be up to law enforcement, and whether law enforcement would pursue that or not, and I don't know the answer to that. But at that point, right, that's where it would sort of the jurisdiction would sort of fall under this other agency or entity.
Yeah, Marty can see this more than me, but for even for negligence, if you tested high for several times, I forgot how many times you can test high without getting a penalty. So Marty can probably tell us more, but you cannot just see I tested high without any consequences. So there's a regulation on that.
So under the rules of our pilot program, the way NCDA has been running it is you get tested once. If it tests high, it goes to the state lab for a second test. And typically it's limited to 2 tests, but there have been occasions when they have tested it a third time. And if it still tests hot a third time, then it is to be destroyed. That will change under the USDA's final rule a little bit. So one of the things that happens under the USDA's final rule is if a grower tests, there's what's called a negligence threshold. So if it tests between 0.5%, I'm sorry, let me back up. If it tests above 1%, then the grower gets what's known as a negligent violation. There's a cap on that to 1 negligent violation per calendar year now. It's either calendar year or growing season, but let's just say once per year. But if a farmer has a negligent violation, if they get 3 in 5 years, then they get kicked out of the program for 5 years. So in that way, the USDA's final rule is a bit more stringent than what we have in North Carolina right now.
Good information there. Yeah, that's good to understand. I had a feeling that it might turn over to law enforcement if it wasn't properly destroyed, but it's good to get clarification on that. So we have another question from the live stream chat. Dr. Suchoff already touched on where the 0.3% threshold came from, the arbitrary study from the 1970s that used the leaf and not the flower, I believe. But they ask next, if cannabis is legalized and the threshold for hemp is not raised, would you have to destroy the hot hemp, or could it then be sold as cannabis?
That's something that I know folks are working on at the national level. So my understanding is there's a push nationally to try to have federal legalization in the next, I'd say, 2 to 4 years, depending on who you talk to. But I think that is something that folks are talking about, if there's a way to move it from one stream into the other stream, if possible. So I don't have an answer for that right now, but I do know that it is a conversation at the federal level.
That's good to know that we're talking about that, because I know it should be being discussed if we're getting the questions about it now. So that's good to hear. Another question for me. So we talked about that hemp can be used for fiber, grain, and CBD. And so on that grain, how could hemp improve that feed conversion in the agriculture industry, or how much has that been studied as hemp as a feed supplement in animal agriculture, especially in a state like North Carolina where it's so big?
So currently grain is not, you cannot feed, this is an interesting one. You can't feed animals hemp grain. It's not allowed yet, but humans can eat hemp grain. It's the weirdest thing. Now, I know that they're looking at, looking at the efficacy and safety tests in terms of use of hemp grain for animal feed. And I'm sure eventually it will be allowed. But currently, you can't feed your chickens hemp grain. So, yeah. I'm not an animal scientist, so I couldn't tell you about, its quality. I do know that it has a pretty high amount of omega-3 fatty acids, which, everyone looks for in their diet. But I couldn't speak to conversion.
Interesting. It seems like there'd be a lot of potential there, but it is interesting that humans can eat it, but our animals can't, which we eventually eat anyway.
But that's kind of FDA regulation type deal. Well, I don't know exactly how animal feed is being regulated, but sometimes, just like David said, it's even more strict than human consumption. It's just the way it is. For the feed part, there's some research been doing from other states. I don't think we in North Carolina we've been doing anything on feed. I think in Kentucky, there's a professor doing kind of an animal feed study with hemp. I haven't really followed the results yet. So there are some research going on that side, just not quite in North Carolina yet.
That's what I was going to say. I thought I read something the last couple of days that there is a university, and maybe it was Kentucky that I was reading about, where USDA has approved a study, but it is very, very limited right now.
Interesting. That's good to know. That's good information. And so here's a question from the chat, the live feed, that is a little over my head. I hope you can interpret it better than I can, but why is Delta 8 THC legal in NC?
Oh, the Delta 8 question. Marnie, you want to take this one?
I knew that would be coming. Delta 8. So the more I hear about Delta 8, the more I'm not sure exactly how to give a concise answer on this. So there is a lot of debate about Delta 8 and whether it's legal or not. I was listening to a panel of attorneys the other day, and half of them said that it is legal, and they gave their rational, their arguments, their rationalization from statutory language about why it was legal, and then the other half gave the exact same thing for why it wasn't legal. So there's still an argument about this. We are still waiting for the DEA's final rule. That hasn't come out. There are also, I think, 2 lawsuits right now against the DEA. So we're still waiting for those lawsuits to be settled. There are some states, and I forget the exact number, I forget if it's between 5 and 10, I think, states that have come out and specifically said that Delta 8 is illegal. We don't have that here in North Carolina. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but right now, the way the North Carolina Department of Agriculture is interpreting the law is basically that, like I've said earlier, that hemp production, the authority over hemp production for NCDA, for our Department of Agriculture, ends with cultivation, right? So once it's harvested, it's out of the jurisdiction of NCDA. So at this point, like I said before, we don't have another agency that regulates consumer products because we don't have that guidance from FDA, and our State Department of Agriculture will follow what FDA says on this. So we have sort of this gap right now. And so it would be another issue for law enforcement at this point. So there is a statement from our Department of Agriculture. I posted it, I can't remember when, I think in maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. It is on our extension website. So if folks want to read that, they're welcome to go to the website. And David, I'm embarrassed to ask you, what our website is?
It's hemp.ces.ncsu.edu, I believe.
Thank you.
I should know that. You know, one thing, probably should have prefaced this by saying, you know, what is Delta 8? So Delta 9 THC is what we consider THC when we're talking about 0.3% THC. Delta 8 is an analog of THC. The plant produces a very, very, very small amount of Delta 8 naturally, but Delta 8 can be created by converting CBD to Delta 8 in the lab. And so you'll hear about people that will do this conversion and then they'll basically spray it on hemp, or they will sell it as a distillate or whatever. And so while it is being made in very small amounts in the plant, any product that says it has Delta 8 on it has been synthesized from CBD.
Interesting. Learned something quite new there myself. And in case you didn't hear Dr. Shuchoff and what Dr. Coit was alluding to, NC State Extension's hemp website is hemp.ces.ncsu.edu. And you can go there for more information and some of the publications Dr. Coit has been talking about. And so kind of gearing back, we talked a little bit about other potential uses of hemp as far as replacing plastics or something of the like. What are some of the other alternative hemp markets out there or alternative hemp products? So if somebody says they don't want to grow CBD for CBD, what could you say they could grow for or a product?
Well, I think that, I am cautiously optimistic and excited for fiber hemp. I think primarily for North Carolina, because we have such a rich textiles history. And so it's not hard for one to imagine, our farmers producing fiber hemp, and that fiber is then being processed and made into anything from, apparel to non-woven products like packaging, to some of the other things that I think, I don't know if it was Marnie or Sanjun had mentioned, I think it was Marnie, about, car panels and insulation, or even composite boards and so on. So, the one thing there, and of course this is still the catch, is that those industries are still not very well developed. And so, I can't go to a farmer and say, yeah, you should grow fiber, you'll be successful. A, because we don't really have those genetics, as I mentioned earlier, and B, we don't really have all of the other necessary processing and production infrastructure there for it to really be moving.
Yeah, hemp is a amazing plant species. It can grow. It can be used for a lot of different things. On the animal side, you can use the short fiber. When you get those long fiber for rope for stuff, you can turn into the bedding materials. You can make a hemp crates, which can be used for building. And those are, I think there is a house built totally with hemp stuff. So hemp can be used a lot of different things. Not only the things we talk about, like CBD and the greens. The fiber, we usually talk about the long fiber. The fiber we use for more tough, more kind of a strengthening or material stuff. And the soft fiber can be used for different things. I know a lot of people use that for animal bedding. They said pretty good. The good thing is a lot of industry people and also a lot of scientists been working in this area already. So recently I've been contacted by some companies about how to line up farmers grow hemp fibers for them. So which is really a good thing there.
So there's a graphic that's floating around online that you can find online that says that I think there's 25,000 different uses for hemp. So I don't think any of us can name them all, but yeah, as we've alluded to, there are a lot of different uses for it, and that's why I say despite everything that the three of us have said today and how cautious we are, I'm still very optimistic about the industry because I do think there's so much potential. I think there's so many things we haven't explored. I agree with David. I think fiber is one of those big areas. But with 25,000 different uses, there's so much more I think that can be done. But we are still missing a lot of the infrastructure also for fiber and some of these other uses.
Well, that's awesome to hear. It's very encouraging to hear that perhaps there is another agricultural commodity out there that North Carolina can grow and help change the world and potentially help with the effects of climate change, being a replacement for more non-renewable products that we make, that hemp can help replace that. So we've got time for one more question from the chat before we go into closing statements. It's been very informative, but here is this question. To what extent does the Delta-9 THC content matter in the Delta-8 THC discussion? Would there be a concern if Delta-9 THC levels exceed 5% weight levels?
David, do you want to take this one?
I don't know. I mean, I think if it's 5%, it's an illegal product. Yeah, I'll be quite honest. Once hemp gets out of the field, that's kind of where my expertise really goes downhill quickly. So I don't really know how to answer that question, to be quite honest.
Ruben, can you repeat that again, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. To what extent does the Delta-9 THC content matter in the Delta-8 THC discussion? Would there be a concern if Delta-9 THC levels exceed 5% weight levels?
I'm not sure I completely understand the question, but I think what David said would be accurate. We're looking at under our pilot program rules, it is really looking at that 0.3% THC. But again, I'm not sure that I completely understand the question. So I don't know if there's a clarification on that question.
The question is very confusing. So if you are growing hemp for CBD and grow any hemp, it's beyond 0.3%, it's illegal already. You cannot do that. And then, the Delta-9 THC is already over 0.3%. So how Delta-8 will matter, right? I'm on the same boat as Ronnie. I just didn't quite get the question. So.
Well, I apologize for the lack of clarity. My own ignorance about the subject probably kept me from asking it in a better way. But we do have one last question from the audience before we move into closing remarks. And that is, does fiber quality matter and how is it defined?
Yes, fiber quality does matter. And what I can tell the person asking the question is that a lot of folks in our college, the Wilson College of Textiles, are currently looking at developing standards for fiber quality, because currently we don't have any USDA standards in terms of fiber quality for hemp. So things like cotton and other fibers, they already have kind of these gold standards. And so yes, you can have different qualities, and obviously we want the best quality fiber because that brings in the most money. But those metrics are still being developed. But those are also metrics that are done in textiles labs, not necessarily in the field.
Interesting. That's good to know. And so now we are towards the end of our forum. It has been very informative. And now I'll give the time for each of you, starting with Dr. Suchoff, then going to Dr. Gu, and then to Dr. Coit, to provide some closing remarks to make about the hemp industry or your work surrounding it. Really anything if you want to promote your personal work or really send a take-home message with our audience.
Sure. Well, I guess the first thing I would say is just thank you for this opportunity. It's always great to be able to just get more information out to folks about hemp and hopefully dispel some you know, not quite, I don't want to say lies, but not quite truthful things about the crop. You know, what I'll tell folks is that they have to remember that hemp is still a new crop, right? And we are still going through growing pains, and we're still understanding how to grow it, how it fits within our production systems, and what the market is going to look like. It's an exciting time, but what I would tell any farmer, and I know that we've gone over this many times, is don't let that excitement get ahead of you, right? Be really careful if you're considering growing hemp. Be safe. And in terms of my program, we will continue to do work in floral hemp and in fiber hemp. We're really excited to be partnering with our Wilson College of Textiles and really trying to push forward with the development of fiber production and processing here in North Carolina.
Okay, I'll go next. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's been fun, especially I always like the team up with Marnie and David, you know, talking about the hemp. You know, I was not very interested in hemp to begin with, but I got into this because I was assigned to this. But the more I learned hemp, the more I got interested in this. So the big thing for me is I was able to use my knowledge, what I learned from researchers, and by reading the references, literature, and I'm able to use what I learned to help farmers in need. The regulation is confusing, but we have Marnie post things promptly on websites, so we got a clarification on that. So I'm really happy to be able to pass on information to farmers. For myself, I'll continue engaged in the hemp outreach part, extension part. You know, I really appreciate what David interstate and also our research, Dr. Bomik's research. You know, they create a lot of good results, also from NCD as well. So for my research part, I'm a kind of a high tunnel guy. I do a lot of seed extension with low-tech technology. I do have a greenhouse as well. And 2019, I did some research in high tunnels. I think this high tunnel are half protected structure. So it's kind of a semi-greenhouse. We can control environment a little bit better. So I found out the research that year was very interesting, but we did find some hot plants there as well. So last year I was not able to do the research. So for me, I'll continue the research side on that and also doing some greenhouse research. I probably still will focus on CBD, and also will team up with some fiber industry people to see if we can promote the fiber production among small farmers. That's me. Thank you.
I would say that, I mean, first of all, I love working in this area. It's very interesting. I mean, it's exciting partly because it's new. It's exciting because, you know, from my perspective, things are constantly changing, which is exciting and also very challenging. But there are always new legal issues to consider. And I guess the way I view my job is to take that legal information and try to get it out to folks in a way that is clear and understandable, and hopefully in a timely manner. I mean, because things are changing so quickly. And I think it's so important that our growers especially have really accurate information. So that I feel like that's a big piece of my job. The other thing is the people that you work with are amazing. I mean, really creative, entrepreneurial minded folks who are taking risks, and they're thinking of things that I would never think of. It's fun. I mean, it's really fun. And then I would also, again, put a plug in for our website. Because legal issues are changing so quickly, the easiest way for me to get information out to a lot of people is if folks go to our website, you can subscribe, and then when something is posted, it goes out automatically, I think that night or the next morning. And then we also, in addition to the legal information, other folks on the team are posting information about the agronomic practices, about any kind of pests or insects. So everybody's contributing to that website. And again, And I'm sorry, I couldn't remember it earlier, but it is hemp.ces.ncsu.edu. And folks can contact any of us at any time. And thank you very much for highlighting hemp this year.
Absolutely, it was our pleasure. I once again want to thank all three of you for participating. It was an excellent forum. I learned a lot, so I know a lot of people did too. And you did a great job. I also want to take this time to recognize Mrs. Susan Cruz, who was going to also participate on our panel, but due to an unforeseen emergency wasn't able to. But I would like to read her panel bio, just so that you know who she is. And in the event anybody watching on the live stream feels like her experiences could help them as well, that you could contact her. So Mrs. Susan Cruz is an experienced business owner with a demonstrated success record in the health and wellness industry as a coach and in sales. Being a strong entrepreneurial professional, Mrs. Cruz has journeyed from skeptic to success in the fast-paced and rapidly growing CBD industry. Mrs. Cruz had the opportunity to educate hundreds of people with her informational talks on the myths and the truths of CBD. She believes that this is and will be one of the keys to the success in the industrial hemp and CBD industry. We're sorry we missed out on her, but we still had an excellent forum with the three panelists we had. And once again, I want to thank you. I want to thank all of our viewers on the live stream. In uncommon times, we were still able to give a very good and a very productive forum. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in, the participation, the questions from the chat. I'd also like to remind people that Agricultural Awareness Week is still going on in the Brickyard. If you have already been out there once a week, you have a reason. Once this week, you do have a reason to go on out there again. We have a different animal every day, so you have a reason to go out there every day. There's also a silent auction that the link will be floating around for that as well. So thank you for all of your participation. Thank you for watching.